Letter arrived on a Tuesday morning, 3 days before my grandson's 8th birthday party. I was standing at the kitchen counter, still in my robe, waiting on the coffee to finish. The mailman had come early. I almost didn't open it right away. Looked like one of those standard envelopes from a medical office, the kind with a little plastic window. I got a lot of those. At 63, you collect doctors the way you used to collect baseball cards. But the return address stopped me. Midwest Genetics Laboratory, Chicago, Illinois. I set my coffee mug down. My hands weren't shaking. That surprised me. After 31 years of marriage, after everything I had quietly suspected and quietly swallowed, my hands were completely still as I slid my finger under the flap and pulled out that single sheet of paper. I read it once. Then I folded it, put it in the chest pocket of my robe, right over my heart, and poured my coffee. It tasted like nothing. I need to back up, because if I just tell you what that letter said without telling you who we were first, none of it will make any sense. My wife and I met in 1989 at a church potluck in Rockford, Illinois. She was 24. I was 32. She had brought a green bean casserole and a laugh that could fill a room. I was a recently divorced man with a used Ford pickup and a steady job at a manufacturing plant on the edge of town. Not much to offer, she disagreed. We married 14 months later. Small ceremony. Her parents came. Mine drove up from Indianapolis. It was February, cold enough to crack the sidewalk, and she wore her mother's dress with the lace sleeves, and I wore a suit I borrowed from my brother-in-law because mine no longer fit. We had one son together, Robbie. Born 1993, he grew up quiet and good-natured, the kind of kid who never gave us real trouble, who called when he said he would call, who showed up when he said he would show up. He married a woman named Tess in 2014. They gave us 2 grandchildren, Lily, who was 10, and the birthday boy, Noah. That was a family on paper. Here is what was underneath the paper. My wife had a college friend, a man named Shaw. They had been close before I came along. Close in the way that people sometimes are when they are young and nobody's married yet and the nights are long. When we got together, she told me that was all over. I believed her. I had no reason not to. Shaw moved to Cincinnati, got married himself, had kids. We saw him maybe once every few years at mutual friends' gatherings, the kind where everyone drinks too much wine and talks about what they used to want to be. He was pleasant enough. I didn't like him, but I couldn't have told you exactly why. Instinct, maybe. The way he looked at her sometimes when he thought I wasn't looking. 1995 was a hard year. I had taken on a second job because the plant had cut hours. I was tired constantly, working 6 days a week, coming home after dark. My wife had gone back to part-time work at a dental office. We were ships passing. We weren't fighting. We weren't really talking either. Shaw's marriage fell apart that year. He moved back to Rockford for about 8 months before landing a job in Minneapolis. During those 8 months, he and my wife reconnected. That's the word she used, years later, reconnected. I didn't find out about it until 2019. She told me herself. We were sitting at the kitchen table after dinner, and she just started talking. Like she had been holding her breath for 24 years and finally couldn't anymore. She cried. She said it had only been a few months. She said it never happened again. She said she was sorry in every way a person can say they're sorry. She said it with words and tears and then just silence. She also told me that when she got pregnant with Robbie in early 1993, there was an overlap, a few weeks where the timing was uncertain. I sat at that table for a long time. I did not yell. I'm not a yeller. I asked her one question. I said, "Does Robbie know?" She said, "No." She said, "No." I said, "Does Shaw know?" She said, "I'll know." She said, "I don't think so." I said, "Go to bed. I'll be up in a while." I sat in the kitchen until 2 in the morning. Then I went upstairs and lay down next to her and stared at the ceiling until the sky started going gray. We stayed together. I know some people reading this won't understand that, but we had 30 years in. We had Robbie. We had Lily and Noah coming to our house for sleepovers, eating my wife's pancakes on Saturday mornings, falling asleep on the couch during football games. I was 62 years old, and I was not interested in burning the whole thing down. What I was interested in was knowing the truth. That was something I had to do quietly, on my own. because I could not ask my wife to get a DNA test done. She would have told Robbie, and Robbie would have been devastated. And what would we even do with that information? What was I going to do? Call up Shaw in Minneapolis and say, "Hey, remember 1995?" So I did it the only way I could. I ordered a home DNA kit. Swabbed my cheek. Then one afternoon, when Noah was over and I was helping him with a puzzle, I swabbed the inside of his cheek too. Told him it was a special test to see what superheroes he was made of. He thought that was the greatest thing that had ever happened to him. He made me promise to show him the results. I sent both samples to Midwest Genetics Laboratory under paternity test request with a note explaining that I was testing grandfather-to-grandchild biological relationship, which is a legitimate test they offer. If Robbie was my biological son, Noah's DNA would show a strong match to mine in the grandparent-grandchild panel. That was 6 weeks ago. And now I was standing in my kitchen holding a letter that said the probability of a biological grandparent-grandchild relationship between me and Noah was 0.04%, which is laboratory language for he is not your grandson, which means Robbie is not your son. I did not tell my wife that day. I drove to the hardware store and bought weather stripping for the back door because it had been drafty all fall. I installed it. I made a sandwich. I watched the evening news. My wife came home from her shift at the dental office and asked me what I wanted for dinner, and I said I wasn't very hungry. Just whatever was easy. She made soup. We ate. She asked me if I was feeling all right. I said I was just tired. She said I had been tired a lot lately, and maybe I should make an appointment with Dr. Harmon. I said I probably would. That night I lay in bed and I thought about Robbie. He was 31 years old. He coached Little League on weekends. He had a mortgage and a good job in logistics, and he called his mother every Sunday without being asked. He had my last name. He had a lot of my habits, the way he organized his garage, the way he took his coffee, the way he got quiet when something was wrong instead of erupting. I had always chalked that up to environment, watching me, learning from me. Now I turned it over and looked at it from the other side. Did he look like Shaw? I tried to remember Shaw's face clearly. Tall, darker complexion, strong jaw. I stopped myself. That road goes nowhere good. I sat on it for 4 days. On Saturday morning, 2 days before Noah's birthday party, my wife went to the grocery store. I was alone in the house for about an hour. I went to the bedroom closet to the top shelf where I kept a small fireproof lockbox with our important documents. I opened it. I took out Robbie's birth certificate. Father, myself. I had signed it in the hospital. I remembered that room, the smell of it, the particular beige of the ceiling tiles. I remembered my wife's face when the nurse put him in my arms. I remembered thinking, this is the most important thing I will ever hold. That had not changed. That was still true. But I needed to understand what I was dealing with before I made any decision. And I realized I could not do this without talking to someone. Not my wife. Not Robbie. Not anyone in the family. I called my brother. He's 2 years younger than me, lives in Indianapolis still, retired from the post office. We've always been straight with each other. I called him from my truck, parked in the driveway, engine running for the heat. I told him everything, start to finish. He didn't say anything for a long moment. Then he said, "Does she know you know?" I said no. He said, "What are you going to do?" I said, "I don't know yet. That's why I'm calling you." He said, "Well, what do you want to happen?" That was the right question. That was exactly the right question, and I did not have an answer. The thing about a secret like this is that it has a weight to it. It doesn't get lighter by sitting with it. Every morning I came down to breakfast and looked at my wife across the table, and I felt the letter in my chest pocket even when I wasn't wearing that robe. I felt it the morning Robbie called to talk about Noah's birthday party. I felt it when my wife pulled out Noah's baby photos to put in a little album she was making him as a gift. I finally told her on a Thursday evening. 9 days after the letter arrived, I waited until dinner was done and the dishes were washed. Then I sat down at the kitchen table. Same table where she had told me about Shaw 4 years ago. And I put the letter down in front of her. She looked at it for a long time without picking it up. Then she picked it up. I watched her read it. Her face went through several things very quickly. When she set it down, her hands were flat on the table and she was looking at a spot somewhere between us. She said, "How did you—" I told her about the cheek swab with Noah. The superhero's test. She didn't say anything. I said, "I need to know what you want to do with this." She said, "What do you mean?" I said, "This information, what do we do with it? Do we tell Robbie? Do we contact Shaw? Do we do nothing?" She was quiet for a long time. Outside, a car went by slowly. The refrigerator hummed. She had gone very still in the way she gets when she is not crying but is close to it. She said, "I never knew for certain. I want you to know that." I did not know. I said, "I believe you." She said, "Does it change things?" "For you?" I thought about that. I thought about 31 years of it. I thought about Robbie calling every Sunday. I thought about Noah's face when I told him the superhero's test was coming in the mail. I said, "It changes something. I'm not sure yet what." We agreed we needed a few days before we talked again. She went to stay with her sister in Peoria for the weekend, said she needed to think. I told Robbie she had gone to help his aunt with some home repairs. He didn't question it. Noah's birthday party was Sunday. I went. Of course I went. It was at one of those inflatable play place facilities outside of town. 20 kids running around screaming. Parents standing in clusters with paper cups of lemonade. I stood near the back and watched Noah climb through a tunnel and come shooting out a slide and hit the padded floor laughing. Robbie came and stood next to me. He said, "He loves you, you know. You're his favorite person." I said, "Don't tell your mother that." He laughed. He put his hand on my shoulder for a second, just briefly, the way men do, and then went back to where Tess was trying to manage the chaos near the K table. I stayed until the end. I helped carry boxes to their car. I hugged Noah, who smelled like sweaty child and frosting, and he said, "Grandpa, did the superhero's results come yet?" And I said, "Not yet, buddy. These things take time." He said okay and squirmed out of my arms to go chase someone. I drove home. I sat in my truck in the driveway for a while, long enough that the neighbor's porch light came on. Then I went inside. My wife came back from Peoria on Monday afternoon. She sat down across from me and she looked steadier than she had the week before. She said she had talked to her sister. She hadn't told her sister the details, just that she was dealing with something hard and old. Her sister had listened without pushing, apparently, which is more than most people would do. She said, "I think we have to tell Robbie." I said, "Why?" She said, "Because he has a right to know his medical history. Shaw's family has a history of heart disease. Robbie should know that." I said, "Shaw's family doesn't even know Robbie exists." She said, "I know." We sat with that. I said, "What does Shaw know?" She said, "Nothing. He never knew there was any question." We never had that conversation. I said, "Is he still in Minneapolis?" She said, "I have no idea. I haven't spoken to him in years." I looked at her. I said, "And what do you want to happen?" "Not Robbie, not Shaw. What do you want?" She looked at the table. She said, "I want to not have been a coward for 24 years. I want to have told you in 1995. I want a lot of things that I can't have." I said, "That's honest." She nodded. I said, "I'm going to need some time before I know what I want to do about Robbie. I'm not ready to have that conversation with him yet, and I don't want to have it before I'm ready." She said, "Okay," I said, "but I'm not leaving. I want to be clear about that. I'm 63 years old and I'm not leaving." She looked at me then. Her eyes went full. She didn't say anything for a moment. Then she said, "I know I don't deserve that." I said, "Probably not." She almost smiled. Not quite. I did not contact Shaw. I considered it for about a week and then I put it away. He had moved on with his life. He had his own kids, his own history. Introducing this grenade into his life 29 years later. What was that going to accomplish? I am not in the business of blowing things up just to watch them burn. That was never my style. What I did do was call Robbie. Not to tell him, not yet. I wasn't ready for that, and I still don't know if I ever will be. I called in just to talk, which I don't do enough. We talked about Noah's upcoming soccer season and about a problem he was having with a vendor at work and about a used snowblower he was thinking about buying because they were saying it was going to be a bad winter. We talked for 45 minutes, and I listened to his voice and I thought, this man is my son. Every way that matters, this man is my son. When we hung up, I felt lighter than I had in weeks. Not because anything was resolved. Nothing was resolved. Nothing was resolved. There was still a letter in my lockbox, and a conversation somewhere in the future that I might or might not have, and a name, Shaw, that would never entirely leave the room again. But I had made a decision, not the dramatic kind, not the kind that changes everything on the outside, the quiet kind. I was not going to let this define the rest of what we were. There's something nobody tells you about being a man of a certain age and reaching the end of a long marriage that has held some damage inside it. You think, when you're young, that you would leave. You think you would be the kind of man who stands up and draws a line and walks away with his dignity intact. Maybe some men are. Maybe that's the right choice for some men. But I have been with this woman for 31 years. I know the sound she makes when she is coming down with a cold. I know that she cannot sleep when there is a light on anywhere in the house, and I know she puts her keys in the same bowl every single day without fail, and I know that when she is frightened, she goes very quiet instead of loud. I know that she stayed awake the entire night that Robbie had an emergency appendectomy at age 14 because she could not stop listening for the phone. I know who she is. She made a terrible mistake in 1995. She made a worse one by carrying it alone for 24 years. I had already decided to forgive the first part, and I was working on the second. Robbie's birthday was in March. I drove to his house that Saturday and we grilled steaks in the cold because he likes grilling steaks in the cold. And Tess made a chocolate cake from scratch. And Noah told me, very seriously, that Grandpa, the superhero's test, still hadn't come. I told him some tests take a very long time. He nodded like that made perfect sense and went back to his video game. After dinner, after the kids went to bed and Tess went to check on something upstairs, Robbie and I sat at his kitchen table with 2 mugs of decaf. The kitchen was warm. Outside, it was just starting to snow, the light kind that doesn't amount to much. He said, "Dad, are you okay? You've seemed, I don't know, off since the fall." I looked at him. 31 years old, strong jaw, calls his mother every Sunday. I said, "I'm okay, son. Just getting older. It catches up with you." He said, "You sure?" I said, "I'm sure." He said, "Okay, good." We sat there for a while and watched the snow come down outside the window and drank our coffee and didn't say anything. It was comfortable, the silence. The particular kind of comfortable that you only get with people you've known long enough that you don't have to fill every space. I drove home around 9:30. The roads were slick. I took my time. My wife was still awake when I got in, reading in the chair by the lamp. She asked how it went. I said it was a good night. She said, "He's a good man." I said, "He is." She turned a page. I went to the kitchen. The coffee from the morning was still sitting in the pot. Cold now, hours old. I poured it down the drain and put on a fresh pot because I wanted something warm before bed. I stood at the counter waiting for it and I listened to the sound of the house settling around me. The furnace, the wind outside, my wife's chair creaking slightly as she shifted. I thought about the letter in the lockbox. Still there, folded, waiting. I thought, I know what it says. I don't need to read it again. I poured my coffee. I turned off the kitchen light and walked upstairs. I've thought a lot about what I would tell a younger version of myself. Not to warn him. I don't think warnings work on young men, not really, but just to say the things that will cost you the most won't announce themselves. They'll arrive in plain envelopes on ordinary Tuesday mornings while the coffee is still brewing. What I learned from all of this is something I couldn't have learned any other way, and I'm not sure I would have believed it if someone had tried to tell me. I learned that the hardest thing a person can do is not leave. Leaving is loud. Leaving has a shape to it, a beginning and an end. What I did was quieter and in some ways more difficult. I stayed, and I chose what staying was going to mean. That choice didn't come from weakness. I want to be clear about that. It came from 31 years of knowing who my wife actually is, underneath all the worst things she did. She carried that secret for 24 years, and it carved something out of her that I could see in her face every time the subject of Robbie came up. Every time Shaw's name drifted into a conversation, every birthday, every milestone. She had been paying a private price long before I knew there was a debt. That's not an excuse, but it's a fact, and I found that facts matter more than excuses when you're trying to decide what to do with the rest of your life. About Robbie. I haven't told him. I've thought about it many times. I pick up the phone on a Sunday when he calls and I listen to his voice and I think, would this change anything real between us? He is my son in every way that has ever counted. He learned to ride a bike in our driveway. I was in the waiting room when Noah was born. I've coached him and argued with him and driven 3 hours in a snowstorm to help him move into his first apartment. Biology is one chapter. 31 years is the whole book. I'm not saying that's the right decision for every man. Maybe someday I'll feel differently. Maybe he'll ask me something that makes it impossible not to answer honestly. I don't know. What I know is that right now, today, protecting that relationship is more important to me than the truth as a principle. The truth as a principle is a cold thing. It keeps well, but it doesn't warm much. What I want people to take from this, if anything, is that intelligence isn't just knowing the facts, it's knowing what to do with them. I had the letter. I had the truth. I could have detonated everything in a single conversation. Instead, I sat with it. I thought about the consequences in every direction, not just the ones that felt satisfying. That kind of patience, the kind that holds difficult information without reacting immediately, is something I had to build over decades of getting it wrong first. And the moral part, the ethics of it. I'll say this, my wife made a mistake in 1995 that she could not undo. She made another one by hiding it. But the man who shows up anyway, who builds something real anyway, who loves people in the specific and ordinary ways that love actually looks like, that man is not a fool. He is not a doormat. He is someone who decided that his integrity was not going to depend on other people's failures. I poured my coffee that Tuesday morning. I folded the letter. I put it over my heart. And I chose who I was going to be.